Jake Stuart with the National Sports Media Association. Today, I am joined by the Kentucky Sportswriter of the Year, Jon Hale. Jon, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start off by asking you, you're the beat writer for Kentucky basketball and Kentucky football. What is it like to cover a program that's not only so prestigious, but is so known for their college sports?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, it seems like something that's always going on. As we're recording this, we're 4 or 5 days away from Kentucky losing to St. Peter's in the NCAA tournament, which is a different type of history than we're used to seeing here. Certainly not what was expected, as recently as a week ago when I set out to cover the tournament this year. But that just, it kind of speaks to the idea that there's always something happening here. I've been doing this for 10 years at a variety of outlets now. And in that time, I think I've been to 4 Final Fours, 2 national championship games. They won a national championship. I've also covered a first round NIT loss at Robert Morris, which was crazy in itself in 2013. Bunch of NBA drafts, obviously, a bunch of historic regular season rivalry games and crazy things that have happened. And on the football side, they're not nearly, have the reputation the basketball team does, but, it's been one of the, arguably the most successful period of Kentucky football in the last 50 years. I mean, they've won 10 games twice in the last 4 years, which they hadn't done since 1977. They've been to 5 or 6 straight bowl games. They've won their last 4. Covered 2 New Year's Day bowl games. Mark Stoops has got the football program going in a direction that it hadn't been. So it's kind of an unprecedented time of success for both of the flagship revenue sports, and then there's a bunch of other stuff in the non-revenue sports happening too that's of interest. So it's certainly not hard to find things to write about. That's for sure.
Well, it kind of brings me to my next question. Obviously, you bleed Kentucky, Jon. You were a graduate of UK as well. I want to ask you, what has been, I'm sure this will be Kentucky steer, but what has been your favorite moment or favorite game to cover as a sports writer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's obviously a different outlook on it than I did. Like I grew up in Kentucky. I went to school here. When I was in school was during the Billy Gillispie era of Kentucky basketball. So I was covering that for the student paper. It was pretty easy at the time to kind of drop the fan part of it. So I haven't really cared about the outcome other than just rooting for good stories since then. That part of it dropped away pretty quickly, but it's still fun to see all these things and go places. I mean, if we're talking about most memorable games, obviously the 2012 national championship game in New Orleans against Kansas, that's at or near the top, but in a different way than next year. That first round NIT loss at Robert Morris is one of the craziest things, I've ever seen in person. You walking into the arena that night and a Kentucky team that clearly didn't want to be there, and a Robert Morris, university and athletic department that it was one of the biggest moments in their program's history. And they were just going crazy from the second we walked in the door, and it was pretty clear what was going to happen. So, it's interesting to see it from both ends of that. The football part of it, being in Gainesville when they finally snapped the streak against Florida. I was born in 1987. The last time they had won was 1986. So it was the first time in my lifetime they'd beaten Florida in 2018. I was a student covering it for the student paper when they snapped their streak against Tennessee. So there's been lots of individual games like that. So there certainly have been highlights, but I think I'd have to put obviously that national championship game at the top.
I'm sure. Yeah, that was awesome to cover it. You've been at, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been at the Courier-Journal since 2015, covered Kentucky sports before that. What brought you into the industry? What made you want to be a sports writer?
Yeah, it's weird. I went to college when I graduated from high school in 2005, went to UK, really undecided about what I wanted to do with my future. I'm one of probably the only few journalism majors who actually has a bachelor's of science degree, because I went to school uncertain if I wanted to be a journalist or if I wanted to be an engineer. And so I took all this calculus and chemistry and all that at the beginning of my college career. And then I got to the point where they sent the letter after 2 years and said, if you don't declare a major, we're going to kick you out of school. And so I think it was that I just always wanted to write, and I loved sports, and I was not very good at them. I was a swimmer in high school, but anything that required on land coordination was just not my strength. And so I knew from an early age, if I wanted to be around sports, writing about them was kind of my path to doing that. And I think maybe early in my college career, I pushed back a bit against it a little bit. Maybe wanted to look at something that made more money or, had a little more financial security than the newspaper industry does. But then I just realized that's what my passion was, and it was something that I was good at and something that I wanted to do. And I got really lucky in terms of I had a great journalism faculty, a great mentor, Mike Farrell, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, who was a professor at UK, who really hooked me up with my first job here in town at a local startup online newspaper that probably nobody read at the time, but it got my feet wet and let me do the job, and people saw me doing it, and I just kind of moved up from bigger outlets along the way, and then got the CJ job covering football only in 2015, and then we combined our beats again, so covering football and basketball. I think 2019, I think when that happened, 2018. So it's just been there was some luck along the way for sure, but it was something that I was always passionate about. And I think that's, what brought me to the sport. If I wasn't going to be able to compete, I might as well write about it.
Sure. This is your first award from the National Sports Media Association, Jon. What does this mean to you?
It means a lot. I mean, obviously it's great to always be recognized in these kind of things. It's a nice ego boost, but it probably means more because, so many colleagues and friends, people who are competition, but also people I really look up to, have won this award before. Kyle Tucker, who won it a couple of years ago, who's at The Athletic now, was, my beat partner at the CJ when I first got here, has been a great friend, one of my very best friends, but really helped me get this position that I'm in now. So he's up there, but everybody at the Herald Leader who's won it over the years, John Clay, Mark Story, Jen Smith, all very close friends of mine. People that I really looked up to and am honored to have been even mentioned alongside as a finalist the last couple of years. And so to actually win it is obviously a huge honor and something I'm really proud of.
And that kind of lends to my next question, but was there a single sportscaster, and you mentioned a lot along the way in our conversation, but was there a single sportscaster or mentor that got you into this industry, somebody that made you want to be a writer and write for Kentucky?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of growing up where I did in Eastern Kentucky, I read the Herald Leader every day. That was my paper growing up. So I can remember vividly Sundays after church, there was a newspaper box at the restaurant next door, and I would run over there and buy the Sunday paper and read John Clay and Mark Story, two guys that I'm obviously now get to call colleagues or competition, and I get to work alongside. I read their stuff every week, so that was part of it. But I think my fandom part, obviously I grew up around Kentucky sports, so that was reading the local paper, but the teams that I still root for as a fan and got to kind of separate from the jobs. I'm a huge baseball fan, really followed the Cubs a lot growing up. So reading the Chicago Tribune and guys like Paul Sullivan and Gene Wojciechowski and Bruce Miles, those some of those people were nice enough when I was a journalism student, getting assigned those dream jobs, interviews, assignments. I think most journalism schools do, to respond and talk to me. So there were a lot of people along the ways, but I just really like to read basically anything I could get my hands on. And, luckily enough, I can call some of those people colleagues now.
Wow, that's awesome. A lot of big names you mentioned, especially in the state of Kentucky. Jon, I want to ask you my last question. For younger sports writers, whether it's getting in a time like now or getting in a time like you did, what advice do you have?
Write a lot, obviously, that just whoever you can get to let you write, that's a first step in the door. Get better, read a lot, and then I think people like NSMA, that's probably a great step too. The networking part of it is really, really important. Sometimes you wish it wasn't as important as it is, but forging those kind of connections and seeing people who are doing the job every day already where you want to be, that's really, really helpful. I mean, those people early in my career, I mentioned Kyle earlier. I wouldn't have this job if I had not made that connection with Kyle, when I was at a competing outlet from the Courier Journal, and we became friends, and, he respected my work and was there to recommend me for the job when it became open. So I think that's a huge part of it too.
That's awesome, and something we can all bring in to our work. And Jon, thank you so much for coming on 2021 Sports Writer of the Year in the state of Kentucky. Hopefully we'll see you this summer in Winston-Salem.
Thanks for having me.